Good evening and welcome to Hudson Valley Week in Review, where we look back at the people, places, and issues making news in Ulster County and the region. I'm Amy Greene. We begin tonight in Highland, where a new chapter of the not-for-profit organization Paws of War is now up and running. Veterans of Iraq and Afghanistan face unprecedented levels of post-traumatic stress disorder and traumatic brain injuries. And now there's help for those residing in the Hudson Valley. Paws of War matches service dogs with vets suffering from the emotional effects of war. These dogs provide therapeutic and unconditional love that only a companion animal can bring. Charles Jackson is a Newburgh police officer, a combat veteran, and a dog trainer. He's currently training Geronimo, a year-old German Shepherd who was a rescue dog. Geronimo will be placed with a veteran next month. RNN senior political producer Karen McBride recently spoke to him at his home in Highland.
Charles, you're collaborating now with Guardians of Rescue, and you're heading up their Hudson Valley chapter of Paws of War. Could you tell us a little bit about the mission of that, and particularly the work you do with veterans suffering from post-traumatic stress disorder and also brain injuries?
I got involved with the organization last year. They had put out a call for dog trainers. My wife actually had saw it on social media, and being a veteran myself and a dog trainer, she figured it was a very good fit. So we reached out to the organization, learned a little bit about them. I ended up talking to the president of the organization. He explained what their goals were. They're a not-for-profit. They strictly rely on donations for everything. And one of their missions is to parent a shelter animal, or a animal that isn't wanted by anybody, with a veteran that needs one. Train them up so that they can support the dog for whatever condition that they may have.
Charles, let's talk a little bit about the post-traumatic stress disorder. We've all seen reports about the men and women veterans suffering from it. Certainly a lot has been written about it, and of course Hollywood has jumped on it as for the focus of a number of movies. But you're a combat veteran. You've seen this firsthand. You've been on the front lines. Tell us what it's really like for these men and women, both the emotional stress of war, but then also that very difficult, I would imagine, transition back to civilian life.
One of the most difficult things is when you're in that environment, it's completely foreign to you. No matter how many of your friends that you have with you, you are kind of always switched on. Even if you have some downtime to kind of relax, there's still that overlaying, apprehension of what could possibly happen. So when, you're in that state for so long, it's hard to transition out of it. So when you come home, a lot of veterans that have PTSD or traumatic brain injuries, they come home and they feel as if, they don't like to be around large crowds. They're constantly looking, because they're kind of looking for, okay, well, what is that person doing? Is that person a threat to me? So they, they have a hard time getting out of that frame of mind. And, that's one of the benefits of having a service dog, is they can be task trained to help alleviate that.
And I read some numbers recently, and you tell me if these are correct. I think it was about 20% of Vietnam veterans suffer from PTSD, some maybe 12% of men and women that served in the Gulf, and I think I read about 12% of folks that were in the Iraq War. And this is compared to about 7 maybe or 8% of average citizens who may suffer from that at some point in their life. Are those numbers correct?
Yeah, they're pretty correct. Even the average citizen that has post-traumatic stress disorder, it's just a traumatic event in their life that stays with them. And a lot of times people can't just get over that on their own. Some options are medicating, and nobody wants to be medicated. So, they found that these dogs have a very calming effect on them, makes them feel more secure. When you task-specific train a dog, you could pretty much train a dog to do most things. Some of the things you could train them to do is, they'll actually block in front of you, or block behind you. So as if you and I are having a conversation, and I don't know what's going on behind me, the dog will go, be looking behind me, or I could actually put him in a position where he just blocks anybody coming up behind me from actually getting to me. They can do pretty much anything.
Talk about where the dogs come from. Some of these dogs come from shelters.
That was one of the goals of the program was, getting these dogs from these kill shelters, getting them out of there, assessing them, try to find them and place them in, just a regular family. But then there's sometimes, a dog that you'll see that kind of might have that right quality that you're like, this might, he might benefit somebody.
You're a canine dog trainer, you're a police officer, so you're very familiar with dogs. But how does this process work? How do you identify the dogs? How do they become certified? And then how do you match? How do you know who would be a best fit for whom?
Most of the times we get a dog, they're either donated. If not, then we get them from a shelter. Most people that run animal shelters, they're very good with animals, of course. So they've learned to read a dog, and there's certain things you want to take into consideration. Of course, you don't want a dog that's aggressive in any way. You want a dog that has a lot of drive, a lot of play drive, ball drive. You want a dog that, wants to work. They want to please, and those are the things that you kind of shape to do those specific tasks that you want. Everything that we do for those specific tasks is all based upon, a reward system, playing for them. We want to make it fun. We want to make it a game. Just like if you play fetch with your dog, it's really the same concept, but instead of throwing the ball, we have them do another specific thing, and then they get rewarded. And that reward can be either a treat, it could be a toy, or it could just be your praise that you give the dog.
And how long is the training involved when you get a dog, when you first get the dog, to when you deliver it to a veteran?
It really varies depending on the specific needs of the veteran. So like at this point with the dog that I'm doing right now, we don't have a veteran for him. So I can only take him so far. So the things that I do with him now is basic advanced obedience, making sure that he is focused on the handler, which would at this time is me, and getting him socialized, environmental issues. I pretty much bring him everywhere. I bring him to the mall. I bring him to street fairs. I bring him to my kids' baseball games. Because those are all things that we need the dog to be accustomed to, so that, and see how he reacts. There are dogs that wash out of the program, but you want to find a dog that has a pretty even temperament.
Why would a dog wash out of the program?
It could be something as simple as being overly protective, wanting to, being protective over food. They could not, maybe they, can't handle for that specific veteran the tasks that they need.
You mentioned before that the dog's temperament is very important because they need to be in public places, and the veteran owner of the dog can bring this dog with him or her to all public places, including on airlines, correct, and into restaurants?
Yes.
And that's under the ADA?
Correct, yeah. Once the dog is fully trained up, then the dog falls under the American with Disabilities Act, which is administered by the Department of Justice. Now, New York State also has laws on the book for service dogs. Like right now, since he's in training, some people are like, oh, you can't really bring him and do these things. But New York State luckily allows the trainer to work with him, because they realize, how is he going to get accustomed to that if you don't let him go in there? So he's afforded all the same rights as a full service dog. So, the ADA is, it's, unfortunately, a lot of people aren't educated enough about it. and you know, the access that they're allowed.
Now, you've been doing this now for, is it 2 years?
That I've been working with this organization, yes.
Could you tell us about some of the veterans that might have benefited from this program, what you've seen?
The last dog that we did, Miguel Torres, it was very nice actually. The Giants, New York Giants organization, in conjunction with Paws of Wars, and you know, they allowed us to do the handover during a Giants game, you know, right on the field. So, you know, one of the benefits that it had for Miguel was that, you know, he didn't really like people. You know, he didn't like to go grocery shopping. He didn't like to go out of his house. So when he got the dog, he felt more comfortable because he always knew he had somebody with him. And it kind of served a dual purpose. You know, the people don't focus on me so much, they focus on the dog. They always want to ask questions about the dog. And that gets me out in public, gets me used to being around people again. And it's a slow process, but you know, it allowed him, even just, you know, Miguel knowing that he was going to get the dog, he was in a packed stadium full of, you know, screaming football fans. And, you know, he handled it great, but he knew, you know, it gave him a sense of purpose. And a lot of times that's what these dogs do. It gets, you know, their handlers, their veterans out in public. You know, that's one part of it, but then they also provide, there's other benefits to it, like you were talking about, night tremors, and you know, there's some veterans that don't like to go into their house. They're afraid somebody's in there. So we can train a dog to go in and search the house for them first, and then come back to them and say, hey, everything's okay. You know, getting and then they feel comfortable because they know what the dog did, you know, can do. So, you know, the difficulty is finding the right dog for the right veteran. You know, the whole application process, the way we do it is, if we have candidates, dogs, and then as hopefully word spreads about the organization, more veterans will start applying. They realize, I know a lot of them are like, oh, I wish I could have one, but you know, I can't, you know, that I don't know how I'm going to afford it. Well, these dogs, we train them, we give it to them for free. There's no cost to the veteran whatsoever. So, and that's you know, because when you have post-traumatic stress disorder, yeah, sometimes you have a hard time maintaining a job. You're on a limited income, so you know, that's always taken into consideration, where they think, I can't take care of them. You know, how am I gonna, you know, afford to get a dog? Because a lot of service dogs, there's really two types. They're called program dogs and owner trained dogs. And depending on what the specific need is, some of the program dogs can cost up to $10,000 to $20,000.
And what is the difference?
Well, the owner trained dogs is if you had your dog and you had some type of disability, and you know, needed a service dog, that you trained him yourself, as opposed to me, I'm training the dog, and you know, I'm going to turn it over, you know, to the veteran. One of the reasons why I wanted to expand it up in this area, since I live up here, is that it gives me, or will give me, the opportunity to work more closely with the veteran, so that he has a resource that's close by.
When we return, more of Karen's conversation about Paws of War with Charles Jackson. We'll be right back.